You can get sued very heavily if you do not
You can
follow
get
it.
sued or get a fine. It's a federal offense. Do y'all remember the name of the law? Its initials are on here.
HIPAA.
HIPAA. And what it stands for, that was one of your abbreviations last year. Health.
Insurance policy.
Insurance. Portability.
Accountability Act.
And Accountability Act.
I just found it on paper.
Yeah. Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. And HIPAA is a federal law that says that you cannot share a patient's information with anybody that they haven't specified that has permission to do that. And there's specific rules, so let's look at some of these. It says confidentiality is related to healthcare dates back to the Hippocratic Oath. Who was Hippocrates? Remember? What was he considered?
The father of medicine?
Father of medicine. What era is he from?
A long, long time ago.
Greek.
Greek. Yeah. It says, and whatsoever I shall see or hear in the course of my profession, as well as outside my profession, if it be what should not be published abroad, I will never divulge, holding such things to be holy secrets. Oh, you know, and that's, I mean, how important is that to you, that you can go to the doctor and trust that they're not going to share your personal information? It is very important. I mean, you may have an issue you don't necessarily want everybody to know about, or maybe you just don't want to tell everybody yet, or whatever.
What if the police get a warrant back on TV?
Well, then that gives them reason to, yes.
And then everyone in the world knows about it. That kind of sucks.
Could be. But, yes, there are specific instances. We'll talk about some of those. It says confidentiality is a precept of the Hippocratic Oath and the American Medical Association's Code of Ethics. Not only is a breach of confidentiality unethical, what's the difference between, well, it's not only unethical, but it's also illegal. So what's the difference in those? Unethical versus illegal.
Unethical means that you're not really, you can sometimes do it without breaking the law. But illegal means you're breaking law, period.
Okay, illegal means you're breaking law. So then what does exactly unethical mean?
That it goes against what you think is right. It goes against your morals.
Okay. Yeah, it goes against what we'll say society kind of deems as right. Okay, like, I don't know, all kinds of ethical situations are in anything, but especially in healthcare. So, all information concerning patients is referred to as privileged information. You'll probably remember that from last year, and should only be shared with the hospital employees who are caring for that patient. Okay, so if I'm caring for somebody on the 2nd floor, can I go tell the people who work on the 5th floor about it?
No.
No. Even if they work at the same place. It's not their patient, it's still a breach of confidentiality. Make sense? Only people who are directly involved in their health care. And that's especially the case, I mean, anywhere else, especially, I had a kid, maybe from Wolf City last year, I don't know, one of the schools, who went to the hospital in Greenville to do her clinical rotation, and they came in, and the person who was going into surgery was actually her mom. So she knew her mom was having surgery that day, but she didn't know she was going to be able to watch it. And so she told them, of course, you could not watch that because that would be a confidentiality issue, and just, I don't know, that would be an ethical issue too,
But it's her mom.
Do I?
It's her mom.
Yeah, that's why.
That's a big overlap.
Right. And so she had to switch what she was doing that day or something. I'm not sure exactly how all that worked, but. So, it becomes an issue too, especially small towns like this where we know everybody, we know people at the nursing home, we know people you see in home health. That's one of the reasons your parents can't drive you to patient homes, because that would be a breach of confidentiality too. Whereas you've signed your confidentiality statement, you're part of this learning program, your parents are not. Make sense? So. Okay, it says HIPAA stands for the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act of 1996. Congress passed this landmark law to provide consumers with a greater access to healthcare insurance, to protect the privacy of their data, and to promote more standardization and efficiency in the healthcare industry. So it's more than just confidentiality, but typically when you hear HIPAA laws, they're talking about confidentiality. So that's why HIPAA covers a number of important healthcare issues. This informational series focuses on the administrative simplification portion of the law, specifically the electronic transactions and code sets requirements. So what they're saying is it specifically applies to, it's just with us having the internet and so many files being stored electronically instead of on paper like they used to be, that can go two ways. It can have a greater risk for confidentiality problems because if somebody hacks into the system or somebody leaves a big one you'll see is if people stay logged into the computer and then they don't log out and somebody else comes and gets on the computer. You see where that could be an issue. So a lot of times they'll have locks, like password locks, where it will log out automatically after 5 minutes of no use or something like that. So that's an issue, but at the same time, because you can put passwords on things and you can make things harder to get to, sometimes it can be better actually for confidentiality, but it comes with its whole set of problems, versus paper. It says there's 4 parts to this simplification. Electronic transaction code set standards requirements. So transactions are activities involving the transfer of healthcare information for specific purposes. Under HIPAA administration simplification, if a healthcare provider engages in one of the identified transactions, they must comply with the standard of that transaction. As it requires that every provider who does business electronically, so we're talking on the computer, to use the same healthcare transactions, code sets, and identifiers. So that means everybody, what they did was they tried to make it into one, they want it to be standardized. Like if UTI diagnosis code is 599 here, it needs to be 599 in Oklahoma or whatever, It needs to be, they want things to be the same, standardized, so that when care is transferred, it transfers more smoothly. It's not it goes easier that way. As code sets are the codes used to identify specific diagnosis and clinical procedures on claims and encounter forms. Remember, we talked about these before. The CPT-4 codes and ICD-9. CPT is a procedure code. So let's say I go in to have a C-section, that's going to have a specific number code on it that my insurance is going to pay X amount of money to the hospital for. If I have a colectomy and have part of my colon removed, they're going to pay X amount of money for that. Make sense? That's how insurances determine how much money they're actually going to pay for your care. Not necessarily pay you, but pay I had a lab done in the spring, and I got a bill for it last week, and it was like $1,500, okay, for one lab. But my insurance would only allow them to charge like $195 for it. So even though their bill was $1,500, my insurance said you're not allowed to charge them that. So I only have to pay the $195, which is still ridiculous for one lab. But anyway, and then the ICD-9 codes are like the diagnosis codes. Whenever you get into and you look at your patient's chart, your case study chart in the nursing home, you'll see all those diagnosis codes. They'll be listed. Do you remember what I said? Remember those? We talked about how. It's the same thing. Same thing as the CPT-4 codes, the procedure codes. If they have a specific diagnosis, like let's say I go into the hospital and I have diabetes, I'm gonna get coded as having diabetes, and the hospital is gonna get X amount of money to care for my diabetes. If I have, pneumonia, they're gonna get, pneumonia has a specific code. I can't remember what that one is right now. Anyways, they'll get a specific amount of money for that. Does that make sense? No? What it does is, okay, let's say Okay, let's say I go to the hospital and I have a history of diabetes and I have, I don't know, let's say I have a UTI. It's gotten really bad. Everybody knows what those are, right? Diabetes and UTI, urinary tract infection. Anyway, so I go into the hospital. This is probably my primary issue, but obviously this is going to play, anybody who has diabetes plays a huge part in any illness that they have. So I'm going to go in the hospital. Well, everywhere, UTI typically is 599.0. That's just the number that it's given. There's this book, it's like 3 inches thick, and it's got all the diagnoses and all their numbers in them. So, because I have that, and I'm at the hospital, my insurance is going to give them, let's say they give them $2,000. Up here, if they're having to treat my diabetes, that means I'm having to get insulin, I'm having to get my blood sugar checked every meal or whatever, I have to get special meals, they have to, I don't know, check my urine, they have to do more labs, it just takes a whole lot more care. So because I have diabetes too, maybe they give the hospital $6,000 because I have to stay, let's say I have to stay 3 days. Okay, so the hospital is going to get $8,000. Now, it may cost them $10,000 to take care of me because maybe I'm a really needy patient and I need, I don't know, they have to change my IV 20 times, and it costs a lot more. Maybe I'm a really easy patient and I don't ever need anything, and it only cost them $6,000 to actually take care of me. Well, they're still going to get the 8 either way. So this does a couple things. One, it gives hospitals an incentive to get people out of the hospital quickly, right? Because they're going to get X amount of money regardless. Does that make sense? Two, it makes them want to be sure and take care of me so it doesn't cost a whole lot more money. Now, not everybody in the hospital works that way. Most people who work in the hospital don't care. It's just the big people that care. But not most people. A lot of people do, but you get what I'm saying. Now, let's say another person comes in and they have diabetes and they have pneumonia. Well, pneumonia is a little bit more serious than a UTI, typically, because, one, you're going to have to see a respiratory therapist, you're probably going to do some physical therapy, you're going to have breathing treatments, you're going to have IV antibiotics, all this other stuff. So maybe for this one, they get $4,000, and then they still get their 6. Because this costs more to take care of, because it includes more disciplines, more medication, they're going to get more money for it. Now, at this hospital over wherever, let's say we go to Oklahoma, I don't know, I'm trying to think of, that's not very far away, but anyway. Okay, somebody else goes into the hospital for diabetes and a UTI, they're going to get the same amount of money. That's why it's set up. They always have the same numbers. A UTI is still 599.0 here. This is 281. I don't know what pneumonia is, 586 or something like that. Does that make sense? No?
I'm just confused about the numbers. Like
The numbers are just random numbers that are just given to diseases.
No, okay.
Like if you look up an ICD-9 book, it's just it's got 2 directions. One like the first part of it. Well, I don't know which one's first. But anyways, one section of it has all the numbers listed in order. The second section has them listed in order by like problem, like endocrine system disorders. So it'll have all the different kinds of diabetes, all whatever other endocrine. So you can look it up that way too. But it's just random, not really random, but it's, like a UTI is 599. You're probably going to find other bladder problems are going to be in like the 500s or 600s or something. And they have little, like maybe they have a UTI with a bladder prolapse. Maybe their bladder has prolapsed, then come out of their body. Okay, that might be 599.9. It happens. Anyway, so does that make sense? So, and these numbers, they can have 2 numbers back here. So there's like, I don't even know how many diseases are listed in this gigantic book, but but they're just numbered so that they can attach a specific amount of money to them. Does that make sense? Same thing in home health. Like if you with home health, it's the same way. So if somebody has diabetes, the home health company is gonna get X amount of money to take care of the patient. Now, if they have to go see if the patient is, let's say, again, they're, an ultra needy patient, and sometimes people have reason to be ultra needy, and the nurse has to go out and see them 3 times a week for 6 weeks or however long, they're probably, they're probably going to lose some money. They have to see them really regular. So, I don't know. It's just, it gets all crazy, and I don't know the ins and outs. I only know,
I don't know.
I don't know a whole lot about it. Let's just say that. If that's something that interests you, they have a really good, I think, billing and coding program over at PJC. But so, and a lot of nurses have started coding, where coding is just like if I'm a nurse coder, then a home health company will send me their files and their paperwork, and I'll go in and actually assign diagnosis codes to their patient with the information that they send. And according to how I code it, will determine how much money that home health company gets. But I know there's some places that pay like $70 per item. So like the home health company sends me one assessment, I get they pay me $70 to code it. I mean, it takes a couple of hours, but pretty good money. Definitely something to keep in mind. Anyway, does that make sense on the codes? They're just they seem like the most random numbers ever, and there is a little bit of a pattern to them, but it takes, anyway. Okay, let's keep going. Number 2, it says privacy requirements. So privacy requirements govern disclosure of patient-protected health information while protecting patients' rights. So, like we've been talking about. Security requirements. The security regulation adopts administrative, technical, and fiscal safeguards required to prevent unauthorized access to protected healthcare information. That's like your passwords and making sure your computer logs off after X minutes of non-use and that kind of thing. And 4, it says national identifier requirements. HIPAA will require that healthcare providers, health plans, and employers have a standard national number that identifies them or standard transactions. So what that means is that every business that supplies a service, so every home health company, every physician, every clinic, every physical therapy place, every hospital has a national identification number that says who they are, and that will go on all of their billing, everything. Like if they send something into Medicare or Medicaid, the insurance company, their national identification number is on there. And that's national, so that it's, that was part of that what they said about HIPAA was that they wanted it to be the same everywhere. So it's not by state or anything, it's national numbers. The employer identification number is issued by the IRS, was selected as the identifier for employers, and was adopted effective July 30th, so they use the same one as that. The remaining identifiers, such as the national patient identifier, are expected to be determined. Oh, never mind. It says, who is affected by HIPAA? The law applies directly to 3 groups referred to as covered entities. So, this is what we're going to look at. 1, it's talking to healthcare providers. Any provider of medical or other health services or supplies. So, when I say supplies, I'm talking about DME companies. DME stands for durable medical equipment. It's like Lowry Medical Supply. So, they actually order those. Says anybody who transmits any health information in electronic form in connection with a transaction for which standard requirements have been adopted. So think faxes are the same way on here. Faxes always have to have a cover sheet because they've got confidential information. Any individual or group plan that provides or pays the cost of health care. So any kind of health insurance company has to abide by this. And then it says healthcare clearinghouse is a public or private entity that transforms healthcare transactions from one format to another. So these people who go kind of in between, and I don't know a whole lot about those. So penalties if you do not comply. It says non-compliance is a civil offense that carries a penalty of $100 per person per violation and a maximum of $25,000 per year per incident. So you hear about these companies and it's like, I don't know if y'all probably, I don't know, anyways, and it's like all of a sudden they'll have like 1,000 patient files got exposed at some point or something like that. Sometimes you'll hear about that with like a credit card company or something. Okay, so if it's 1,000 people, this kind of tells you that it's, that can get on up there. It says unauthorized disclosure or misuse of patient information under false pretenses or with the intent to sell, transfer, or use for personal gain or malicious harm is a criminal offense. Penalties for criminal offenses can be up to $250,000 in fines and up to 10 years in prison. It says the Office of Civil Rights within the Department of Health and Human Services enforces these penalties, and then in the Department of Justice is for the criminal ones. So it says unauthorized disclosure or misuse of patient information. I mean, this is all kind of subjective, so it's really going to be, if it were to ever go to law for something like this, a lot of it is going to be how the patient feels, what happened, how it happened, and so forth. So you'll see, I know that sounds weird, the intent to sell, transfer, or use for personal gain. Let me tell you where this comes into play. You'll see it is like home health companies. A lot of times, not a lot of times at all, but you'll kind of, let's say this nurse works at X home health company and this nurse works at this one, and this nurse quits and decides to move over here. Well, if she calls her old patients, or he calls her old patients and says, hey, I'm working over here now, you want to come over here to my new company, that is this problem, that trying to transfer, big time lawsuits can be filed. That's a really big deal.
Why? It's the patient's choice. They're just saying.
It is the patient's choice, but if the healthcare person is trying to coerce them or push them or keeps going, if they have switched jobs, the healthcare worker, they no longer have right to access that patient because their files belong to that other company. So if they use confidential information that they got from that company for this other company, that makes it illegal. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
It is the patient's right. And sometimes you'll see somebody will move and, and the nurse may not even say anything, but the patient finds out, oh, well, they moved over there, so I choose to go move with them or whatever. And that happens. Okay, it says confidentiality means keeping all privileged information private. This includes information pertaining their diagnosis, their history, or their lifestyle, or their demographics. So pretty much anything about them. It says while at work, discussion of patient records should not be discussed in elevators, gift shops, cafeteria, hallway, anywhere that's a public place. Because you don't know who knows the person. You don't know, you never know. You never ever know, so. Okay, it says in all states, certain patient information is exempt by law and reports to proper authorities are required without the consent. So normally to share a diagnosis or history or anything, you have to have either the patient's consent, you always have to have their consent. And it has to be within somebody who's, actually directly involved in their care. But here's some reasons that you can get this information. So one is births and deaths, because that goes into state record. Birth record and death certificate. Okay, second one is emergencies. So if it's an emergent situation, they're not, the ambulance is not going to come and ask you if they're trying to save somebody's life, they're not going to say, can I get your consent to give information to the doctors? No, they're going to give it. It's an emergency. We don't have time for that. Anybody got time for that? Injuries caused by violence. Okay, who's going to be notified in that case? Police. Okay, not the news, not people who are directly involved. That's not the place of the healthcare worker. So, but yes, definitely with the police. Threats of serious bodily harm to another person that may reasonably be believed. So maybe someone's threatening to hurt someone, and you think they're actually going to do it. And this is usually more of a psych issue. And psych patients get into a whole nother level of legal and ethical issues and privacy. But child abuse, physical or sexual, that's always something that needs to be reported. So despite confidentiality, it's that if that's a question, that takes precedence over the confidentiality, like it says here. Vehicular accidents involving drugs or alcohol. Again, police need to be notified in that case. And then reportable, communicable, or sexually transmitted diseases. There are certain diseases. Communicable means it's easily spread, basically. Tuberculosis would be a communicable disease. If somebody were to get smallpox or something crazy like that would be too. Anthrax, whatever. So, and then there's specific STDs that actually are always reported to the state. As a list of reportable communicable diseases varies with state, but the most likely to mandate reporting by state are tuberculosis, hepatitis, AIDS, rheumatic fever, typhoid, tetanus, meningitis, diphtheria, anthrax, malaria, polio. Those are things, some of these like polio and smallpox, leprosy, those are things we don't normally see here. So that's definitely something that those can be easily spread, not something you want a whole group of people to have, any kind of the plague. Kind of interesting, but anyway. The reason with typhoid fever, hepatitis, there's another one. A lot of these are foodborne. Hepatitis A is foodborne at least. And so if there's a place that's, if you got 5 people who have gotten sick out of one restaurant, somebody needs to know. That would be cause for an investigation and so forth. It says reportable sexually transmitted diseases generally include gonorrhea, syphilis, chlamydia, and HPV or genital warts. And so those go into, it's like a registry. And I don't really know why that is, unless they're trying to track and make sure there's not like an epidemic or there's, one person who's like deliberately getting a whole lot of people sick. I don't know. Some states require non-communicable diseases reported to track their incidence. So just to keep up with how much is going or how much it's happened. So cancer, congenital disorders, and so forth. It says disclosure of medical information to insurance companies is made only with patient consent. So you always have to have their consent regardless. This gets hairy whenever you get into minors too, but anyway. Pre-employment physicals do not signify a doctor-patient relationship. So what they're saying is sometimes your job will require you to have like a physical to work there. They want to make sure you can handle the work that they're going to require you to do. If that's the case, they're the one paying for it. They're the one who has a right to those documents. The company does. So that doesn't count towards, that's not a confidentiality breach. They paid for it, they required it, they get the records. Health professionals should respect confidentiality when treating competent minors. It says allow minors to verbally consent to medical care. Confidentiality of minors may be ethically breached when parents need to be informed of treatment or serious illness. So notice ethically. And that gets into a whole hairy situation. Wherever you work today will probably have specific policies on that. So that's where you would go to. It Says physicians who perform autopsies or have access to autopsy reports should maintain confidentiality of HIV status, except when the state laws regarding disclosure to public health and at-risk third parties are appropriate. That's disturbing that they might not be able to actually tell that, but must always be remembered that medical records are legal documents. Always make sure information's factual. That's why you don't want to put subjective information in there. You don't want to put your opinion. You put what you see, what you've observed, what your assessment was, because you don't know. Now, I have not had this happen that I'm aware of, but I know I have some friends who worked in the ER, and plenty of times people have come up and said, tried to sue a hospital or whatever, and hear their notes get blasted on the courtroom wall, and if you write in there, patient, I don't know, patient seems to be abusing drugs. Well, if you don't have any factual evidence on that, that's not something you put in there because that's your opinion. That's going to make it seem like your writing, your charting is not really correct or not factual. So you don't put opinions in there. Instead, if I think they're abusing drugs, I'm going to write in there, patient had 5 bottles of pain medication in their purse. 3 of them had other people's names on them. Patient states has never taken pain medicine before. Caregiver states patient takes pain medicine all the time. Does that make sense? I've got factual information. It's not my opinion. It's not, I think they're using drugs. You can come to your own conclusion when you read that. They've got 5 bottles of pain medicine and 3 of them don't have their own name on them. And they said that they've never taken a pain pill in their life. It doesn't take a whole lot to draw that conclusion that there's something weird going on.
When we were looking at the chart yesterday, they had the subjective and objective.
A lot of times they will. So, and the other thing that is really subjective information is something that the patient says. So that's considered subjective. Now, you don't ever want to write, again, I think the patient feels sad. I'm going to say, well, how do you feel today? And if they say, I've been really sad this week, then I'm going to write in the subjective information, patient states, quote, I've been feeling sad this week. Because once I put it in quotes and I say exactly what they've said, that can be used in a court of law according to what those patients said. They'll take that documentation. But if I only put what I think or what it seems, that's pure opinion. Does that make sense? So if it has a place for subjective information, that wants things that the patient has said. Make sense? It says questionable information should be labeled as opinion or assumption, and sometimes you'll see physicians do that, but they'll usually put a note beside it or something. As a nurse, I'm not going to write anything like that. I don't diagnose people. I only assess and, do whatever the doctor has ordered. That's all. That's the extent of my scope of practice. But the physician can diagnose. So, anyway. It says information that's not relevant to the care of the patient should not be recorded. Okay? If they're 90 years old and their wife is 19 or something, I don't know. Something that, you're like, oh, that's kind of weird. But that's not something that's going to pertain to their health care, So that's not something that needs to be written. It doesn't pertain to what's going on to them. Now, let's say maybe they have 5 dogs and they're coming in with pneumonia. Hey, that could potentially be an issue because there's probably dog hair everywhere and dander, which is going to aggravate the pneumonia. Do you see what I'm saying? So, yes to information that might be relevant. No if you know that it's not. Erasures are not allowed. Okay, errors should be crossed out with a single line so that the mistake is still readable. Correct, legible information can be inserted, initialed, and dated, and then you can include an explanation. So whenever so let's say I'm writing about a patient's wound, patient with wound to left left, lateral ankle. I say, oh no, I mean it's the medial ankle. So I'm gonna put one line through it. I'm gonna write medial, and then we'll put my initials. Just one line. Okay? Makes sense.
Maybe mess up on the spelling.
Did I mess up on the spelling?
No, I mean, that'd probably be my mistake. I just mess up on spelling all the time.
Just practice your spelling ahead of time.
Okay, computers and confidentiality. Says computerized patient data has led to attempts by some firms to use information for marketing purposes. So what does that mean? Marketing.
Like you're gonna
To sell yourself?
like put it out there for everybody to see.
Yeah, well, kind of. Let's say we take, let's see. I can't think of an example. Let's say a firm comes in and tries to, they want all of your patient information, so they can send them a flyer about their new medicine box that they've created. Okay? Obviously, that's not okay to do. But same thing even with the company. Maybe they have, I don't know the specifics on that. I just know that it's not right for them to do it. Now sometimes health professionals are offered incentives to participate. Participation violates confidentiality and ethical codes concerning gifts to health professionals from industries. And this happens, and you'll see it happen, but it is not legal for a company to give a provider a gift in order to give them more patients. So, for let's say a home health company, and I always go back to home health because that's what I've done, but anyways, let's say a home health company offers a physician a free trip to Fiji if they will give them, 100 of their patient names so that they can contact them and market them to maybe get on their services. Or maybe they give the physician a trip to sign up 100 of his patients for home health. Does that make sense? That's what they're talking about here. And those things happen.
I have a question.
Yes.
If you're with the doctor and the doctor moves, are you required to move with the doctor, or can you stay? Like, if you were appointed that doctor for that certain disorder or disease, and you are told to be with that doctor, but the doctor leaves that form and goes to another one, does that mean you're required to go with him, or do you stay there?
Who requires it?
I don't know.
Here's the only time you are really required to see any specific doctor is if you are on an HMO. But I would think if that doctor moves, they should assign you a new doctor.
Yeah.
That's the only time you're really required to see any specific doctor. Now, it may be recommended by someone, but you can always change doctors unless you're on an HMO and they have a specific physician designated to you. Most HMOs are not quite that stringent anymore, but some still are. It says many different individuals who work in hospitals have access to their records, and healthcare providers must create stringent safeguards. So limited personnel who can have access to the records. So you limit, okay, so let's say like when I was in the emergency room at Children's, I could log in, but I can only log in to the emergency room. I couldn't log in and have access to people on the 5th floor, for example. Okay, it says use of codes to prevent. They have the use of codes to prevent access to certain information, so, just passcodes to get more and more information, requirement of them, and then constant monitoring of computer use. So IT department's constantly watching if there's any weird activity going on. Okay, ways in which we, as medical personnel, can guard patient confidentiality. 1, don't disclose information to a third party without a consent. Third party is just another healthcare provider. Or anybody else. Says this includes insurance companies, attorneys, employers, and curious neighbors. Do not decide confidentiality on the basis of personal approval of thoughts and actions. So just because somebody has been, let's say let's say I'm working at Children's and this kid comes in and she's got 3 different STDs. Okay, just because she's got 3 different STDs and I think it's dumb that she has 3 different STDs and she should make better decisions, that doesn't give me the right to go tell all of her information to everybody just because I think she made a bad decision. That makes sense? Her confidentiality, even though she made horrible decisions, is just as important as the next person. Same thing with, maybe a parent came in and made a really bad decision and let their kid, do something else that hurt them. Just because I think they made a bad parenting choice doesn't give me the right to share. Does that make sense? I don't think she's dumb about having 3 STDs. I think she made a dumb decision. That's not it. It says never reveal financial information about a patient, including their account balance. This is confidential, so that's not something that needs to be shared, whatever billing information you have. And when talking on the telephone to a patient, don't use their name if others in the room might overhear. And this, you guys know, you've sat in the doctor's office and heard him talk to people, or wherever. That's really important. Don't use their name. Same thing with answering machines. Here it is. It says, when leaving a message on a home answering machine or at a patient's place of employment, simply ask for them to return the call. Don't leave all of their lab work or any other kind of information on there because you don't know who's going to check it. You don't know who's going to check their answering machine. So always just tell them who it's for and have them return the call. Do not leave medical charts or insurance reports where patients or office visitors can see them. And if you'll notice at Birchwood, those charts are always in that one area. And keep them in that one space. So, and that's fine. Those very reasons. Yes, that's it. If you want to take a break, you can.